The night grew colder as Evelyn sat by her window, watching the snow rise higher along the street. The lamps outside flickered from the strong wind, making the shadows dance strangely on the walls of her small apartment. The room felt too small, too quiet, as if the loneliness itself had become a living thing, sitting beside her. She stood up, wrapped her grey shawl around her shoulders, and walked to the kitchen. The warm yellow light above the counter made the place look softer, almost comforting. Evelyn placed her teacup in the sink and suddenly noticed how worn out everything looked: scratched plates, thin curtains, old furniture. She had lived in this apartment for 20 years, but she never truly lived in it. It was a place of routines, not happiness. A place where she existed, not thrived. She opened the cabinet to make another tea but paused. Her eyes stared blankly at the shelves as a thought whispered inside her mind. What if I leave all of this behind? What if she started fresh? What if she finally gave herself the life she had always given to others? Her heartbeat grew a little faster. She walked back to the laptop and opened the cabin listing again. She zoomed into the photos one by one. A small wooden door with a brass handle. A porch with 2 wooden chairs. A path leading into a forest where sunlight filtered through the trees. A stone fireplace inside the living room. A kitchen with a small window that looked out into the woods. A loft bedroom with a low ceiling and a skylight where snowflakes would gently fall above her at night. She imagined waking up there, wrapped in warm blankets, with nothing but quiet around her. No neighbors shouting, no noisy traffic, no fake family gatherings. Only the sound of trees, birds, wind, and fire crackling in the fireplace. She smiled softly at the thought. For the first time in years, she felt something like excitement. Not loud excitement. A quiet, warm kind. A kind she hadn't felt since she was young. She clicked the contact button and sent a message to the seller. Her fingers trembled slightly. It felt like the beginning of something. Something she couldn't name yet. The next morning, the world outside was a frozen painting. Cars buried under snow, rooftops white, tree branches bending under the weight of winter. Evelyn wrapped a scarf around her neck and stepped outside for the first time in 2 days. The cold air hit her face sharply, but she welcomed it. It felt fresh. Alive. As she walked to the mailbox, she noticed her neighbor, Mrs. Collins, scraping ice off her car. Mrs. Collins looked up and forced a polite smile. "Oh, Evelyn, spending the holidays alone again?" she asked in a tone that was sweet on the surface but sharp underneath. Evelyn gave a small smile. "Yes, just a quiet night." "A quiet night," Mrs. Collins repeated, shaking her head like it was something pitiful. "Such a shame. You should have come with us. Our house was full." Evelyn nodded gently. "I'm glad you had a nice time." Mrs. Collins wasn't trying to be mean, but she didn't understand. Most people didn't. They had families that included them, not families that erased them. Evelyn walked back inside, hung her coat, and checked her laptop again. A reply. Her heart fluttered. The seller had responded. "Yes, the cabin is still available. You are welcome to visit anytime this week." Evelyn stared at the message for a long moment. She felt nervous, almost scared. But beneath that fear was a quiet bravery. She took a deep breath and typed, "I'd like to visit tomorrow morning." She hit send before she could change her mind. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cabin's wooden door, the snowy path, the fireplace. She imagined herself sitting there, reading a book, sipping hot tea, wrapped in a warm blanket while snow fell outside. She imagined a life where she didn't wait for anyone. A life where she lived for herself. Around 2 a.m., she got up, made tea, and sat on the sofa. The glow of the Christmas lights outside turned the room blue. She looked at the card she had made earlier for her family. She picked it up gently. The green ribbon she tied was slightly crooked. Her handwriting inside said, "Wishing you a peaceful Christmas. Love, Evelyn." Her throat tightened. She folded the card slowly and put it inside a drawer. She wasn't sending it. She wasn't pretending anymore. Morning came slowly. Evelyn packed a small bag, grabbed her coat, and stepped outside. The winter wind bit her cheeks, but she didn't mind. She walked to the bus stop, her boots crunching through the snow. The mountain town was about 2 hours away. She sat on the bus, watching the scenery change. Houses thinned out. Roads grew narrower. Snow grew deeper. Trees taller. Silence thicker. She felt like she was traveling into another world. When the bus dropped her off at Snow Ridge, she walked up a small hill. The town was quiet, with shops decorated in wreaths, smoke rising from chimneys, and warm lights glowing through frosty windows. The seller, a middle-aged woman named Maggie, met her near the bakery. "You must be Evelyn," Maggie said warmly. "Ready to see the cabin?" Evelyn nodded, her stomach fluttering. They drove through the woods until the cabin came into view. It looked older than in the photos, but in a charming way. Snow covered the roof, and icicles hung from the porch. Evelyn stepped out of the car and felt her breath catch. It was perfect. Quiet. Beautiful. Peaceful. She walked slowly to the wooden steps, running her hand over the railing. She pushed open the cabin door, and a wave of warm, earthy scent filled her nose: wood, pine, and fire. She walked through each room quietly, almost reverently. The fireplace was real stone. The kitchen window looked out into the forest. The bedroom upstairs had a skylight just like in the photos. Evelyn stood in the middle of the living room, her eyes softening. She looked at Maggie. "I'll buy it," she whispered. Maggie smiled. "Are you sure? You haven't even asked the price again." "I'm sure," Evelyn said, her voice calm. "This is the place." She didn't just mean the cabin. She meant this moment. This courage. This new beginning. As Evelyn signed the papers, Maggie mentioned something casual, something almost easy to miss. "Oh, and you'll find the old owner left a few things behind accidentally. Some books, maybe a journal or two. Feel free to throw them away if you want." Evelyn paused. A journal? Yes, probably nothing important. Just old personal notes. Evelyn nodded but felt a strange shiver. She didn't know why. But something told her the journal wouldn't be nothing. Something told her this cabin had stories of its own. Stories she hadn't discovered yet. Stories her family would soon become part of. And as she placed her signature on the final paper, the pen trembling slightly in her hand, she whispered in her heart, "This Christmas, I won't be forgotten." Evelyn returned to the cabin the following week with the keys in her coat pocket. The small metal key felt heavier than it looked, as if it carried all her quiet wishes and all her silent pain. She stepped out of the taxi, boots sinking into the fresh snow. The morning air was crisp, clean, and sharp, filling her lungs with a strange mix of peace and nervous energy. The cabin stood quietly in the clearing, smoke rising softly from the chimney where Maggie had lit a fire earlier to warm the place. The sky was pale blue, soft like winter silk. The tall pine trees surrounding the cabin swayed gently with the wind, and everything felt untouched, like the world was offering her a blank page. Evelyn took a slow breath, stepped onto the porch, and pushed the door open. Warmth greeted her instantly. The fire crackled in the stone fireplace, filling the cabin with a soft glow. Dust danced gently in the golden air. The wooden walls smelled of old pine and winter memories. She closed the door behind her and whispered, "Home." It felt strange saying the word. She had not felt home for a very long time. She placed her bag on the sofa and walked through the small house one more time. The living room was cozy, with a rug near the fire, 2 wooden chairs, and shelves filled with old books. The kitchen had a small window that framed the snowy woods like a painting. The stairs creaked as she climbed to the loft bedroom, but she didn't mind. The worn wood felt honest, unlike her family's smooth, fake smiles. When she reached the loft, she paused. A small wooden box sat near the window, something she hadn't noticed before. It was simple, square, and slightly cracked at the edges. Dust covered it like a thin blanket. "This must be what Maggie meant," Evelyn whispered. She sat on the bed and pulled the box onto her lap. Her hands shook a little, though she didn't know why. She slowly lifted the lid. Inside the box was an old leather journal, its edges curled and the cover faded. A thin ribbon wrapped around it as if someone had tied it with care. Underneath the journal was a small photograph, barely visible through the dust. Evelyn brushed the dust away gently. The photograph showed a young woman standing in front of the same cabin. She wore a winter coat and a warm smile, holding a cup of coffee in one hand. The photo had a date written in the corner. December 1997, LS. Evelyn frowned. LS? Who was that? Curiosity pulled at her gently, the way winter wind tugs at loose branches. She untied the ribbon and opened the journal. The first page read, "If someone else finds this someday, please know this cabin saved me. Lily Sanders." Lily Sanders. So that was the woman in the photo. Evelyn flipped the page. "I came here to get away. Away from people. Away from lies. Away from being used." Evelyn's heart tightened. The words felt too familiar. It was like reading her own thoughts. She read more. "I spent years giving everything to people who never cared. This cabin is the first place where I can finally breathe." Evelyn lowered the journal slowly and stared at the fire crackling downstairs. It felt as if the cabin had been waiting for her. Waiting for someone who understood pain. Waiting for someone who needed healing. She placed the journal on the bed and walked back to the window. Snow was falling again, soft and slow, like the world whispering secrets. Maybe she wasn't alone after all. Maybe others had also run away from families that forgot them. The thought made her chest warm. Later that evening, Evelyn made tea in the small kitchen, humming softly for the first time in months. The kettle whistled, and she poured the hot water over a tea bag, watching the warm color spread through the cup. She carried the tea to the window and looked outside. The world was covered in white. Her reflection stared back at her through the glass, tired, but not broken. She sipped the tea slowly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Her stomach tightened. Was it her family? For a moment, she almost didn't want to look. She didn't want to ruin this peaceful evening with another cold reminder of how little they cared. But she checked anyway. It was Sophie, her niece. The message read, "Hi Aunt Evelyn. Sorry we didn't invite you again this year. Things were just crazy. Maybe next time." Evelyn stared at the message. Again. Always next time. Those words were like tiny knives. She didn't reply. She put the phone face down on the table. She walked back to the journal. If her family didn't want her, she didn't need to waste her life waiting. She opened the journal again, flipping to the next entry. "I invited my family once to show them my new life. Not because I wanted them with me, but because I wanted them to see they didn't break me." Evelyn felt a slow, determined fire rising inside her. She whispered, "I will do the same." She would invite them next Christmas. Not to join her. Not to fix anything. But to show them who she had become. She imagined their faces when they saw her beautiful mountain cabin. When they realized she wasn't lonely anymore. When they realized she didn't need them. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt strength instead of sadness. The next few days, Evelyn spent her days cleaning the cabin and discovering forgotten things in drawers. She found handwritten recipes, small drawings, old dried flowers pressed inside books. Everything felt like a piece of someone's quiet life. She found old blankets in a wooden chest, washed them, and folded them neatly. She swept the floors, dusted the shelves, and fixed a loose doorknob. The work made her feel alive. At night, she read more of Lily's journal. Lily had gone through heartbreak. She had been betrayed by her sister. She had been used for money. She had been ignored by the people she loved. Every page felt like a mirror. It was as if the cabin had chosen women with wounded hearts, women who needed silence to rebuild themselves. One sentence in the journal stuck with Evelyn. "The cabin heals." She didn't fully believe it at first. But as the days passed, she felt lighter. Her thoughts felt calmer. Her chest didn't hurt as much. The silence wasn't empty, it was comforting. One evening, she stood outside on the porch with a cup of hot chocolate. Snowflakes melted on her cheeks. The sky was dark navy, sprinkled with stars. The woods around her were quiet except for the soft whisper of the wind. For the first time in her life, she whispered, "I am enough." The words drifted into the forest like a prayer. Then, her phone buzzed again. This time it was her brother, Mark. His message said, "Hey, we missed you at Christmas. Maybe you can host next year." You never do anything anyway. Evelyn felt a strange, cold calmness. Host next year. He had no idea she already planned something. She typed a short reply. Sure. Next year. She didn't add any emotion. No smiley faces. No long explanations. Just a cold, clean yes. And she smiled to herself as she put the phone away. Next year would be unforgettable. Not for the reason they thought, but for the reason she planned. The morning after Andrew left for the city, Mark woke up in the mountain house with a strange mix of peace and tension. The air felt fresh, the sky glowed soft pink, and the forest outside whispered with the early wind. But inside his chest, something heavy was sitting. Something he could not name yet. He walked through the living room, touching the wooden shelves, the stone fireplace, the big window that faced the endless mountains. This house still felt like a dream to him. A place he never thought he would own. A place he never thought he deserved. But now, this house was his turning point. And something inside him whispered that trouble was coming. Mark brewed some coffee and sat on the porch. He kept replaying everything Andrew had confessed the night before, the guilt, the regret, the truth about how the family had treated him over the years. Mark did not judge his grandson. He saw fear in the boy's eyes, fear that he had no one left if the family rejected him. But Mark also saw something else, hope. Andrew wanted to make things right. He wanted to change. Still, Mark knew his daughter and the rest of the family. People like them did not let go of control easily. He sat outside for a long time, watching the sun rise higher. He felt something shifting in the air. The silence was too deep. The mountains were too still. It almost felt like nature itself was holding its breath. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. You bought a house without telling us. Call me now. The sender, Linda. Mark stared at the message, his hand shaking a little. Linda always spoke like this, short, sharp, angry. She never asked if he was okay, never asked if he wanted company, never asked if he needed anything. She only asked for control. He didn't reply. For the first time in his life, he put his phone down and walked away. But 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Then again. Then again. He didn't pick up. Not until the 5th call. He finally answered with a calm voice. Hello, Linda. His daughter's voice exploded through the speaker. Dad, what the hell is going on? You bought a house. A house in the mountains. You didn't tell me. You didn't tell the family. Why would you do something like this? Mark kept his tone steady. It was something I wanted. Something important to me. You're acting like a child, she snapped. We have every right to know what you're doing with your life. Mark felt a painful, familiar punch in his chest. The same words he had heard for years. You can't make choices. You don't understand money. You can't live alone. You're not capable. But today, he felt something break free inside him. You forgot me every Christmas for almost 10 years, he said softly. You didn't even check on me. Not once. There was silence. A long silence. Then Linda spoke again, but this time her voice was cold like ice. Dad, don't start drama. You're blowing things out of proportion. We didn't forget you. We were busy. We had plans. You know how the holidays are. Mark closed his eyes. He had heard enough lies in his life to recognize one instantly. What do you want, Linda? He asked. She hesitated. He could almost hear her mind calculating. We're coming to see the house, she said finally. Me, your son-in-law, and the kids. We want to make sure you're not making a mistake. Mark's heart dropped. This was not a visit. This was an inspection. A judgment. A takeover. Today, Linda added. Expect us this afternoon. She hung up before he could respond. Mark sat very still. The forest around him was calm, but inside him, a storm was building. He knew Linda. He knew her husband, Brad. He knew how they behaved when they felt challenged. If they were coming with a purpose. And Mark already had a feeling what they planned. He went inside and stood in the middle of his new home. He looked around the soft wooden walls, the stone fireplace, the warm lighting, the quiet view of the mountains. He asked himself a question he had avoided for years. Was he ready to fight back? For the first time in his life. The answer was yes. He didn't know how yet. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know how they would react. But he knew this. This time, they would not walk over him. This time, he would not be the forgotten one. This time, they would see a different version of him. He spent the next hours preparing the house. Not for guests. Not for a warm welcome. But for a truth that was long overdue. Around noon, the sky darkened. Clouds gathered over the mountains. The wind began to blow harder. A storm was building. Mark stood by the window. His heart pounded slowly, steadily. Then he heard it. A car engine. A door slam. Voices. They had arrived. Mark walked to the door. He took a deep breath. And he opened it. Linda stood there with a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her husband Brad stood behind her, looking annoyed. The kids were already arguing. They didn't greet him. They walked past him like he didn't exist. Linda stepped inside, looked around the living room, and said, "So, this is what you bought. Let's see if it's good enough." Mark closed the door slowly behind them. Something inside him settled. This was the moment. The moment everything would change. And the mountains outside, silent and tall, watched it all begin. The tension in the mountain house grew heavier with each passing minute. The storm outside cracked like a warning, but inside the walls, another storm was forming, one that had been waiting for years. Mark watched his daughter, Linda, walk through the living room like she owned the place. Her heels tapped loudly on the wooden floor. Her husband, Brad, followed behind, wearing the same irritated expression he always had when he visited Mark, an expression that said he wished he were anywhere else. The kids ran immediately toward the sofas, jumping on them with no regard for the furniture. They didn't say hello. They didn't ask how Mark was doing. They just acted like this was another one of their parents' rental cabins. Mark stood silently, his hands trembling slightly. Not with fear this time, but with a building anger that he had pushed down for years. Linda placed her hands on her hips and slowly turned around. "Well," she said, "it's okay. A little small for you, don't you think?" "It's perfect for me," Mark replied calmly. She ignored his answer. "Dad, you should have asked us before buying it. You're not good with big decisions. You know that." Brad chuckled under his breath. "Like when you messed up the insurance thing last year. We had to fix that for you, remember?" Mark remembered. He remembered every time they helped him by yelling, insulting, or blaming. He remembered how they made him feel small, stupid, weak. And now they were trying to do it again. Linda walked to the fireplace and tapped it with her knuckle. "Why is there no safety gate around this? You could fall. And what if the kids visit? This isn't safe." "They never visit," Mark whispered. Linda didn't hear him. Or maybe she chose not to. She moved to the kitchen, opening cabinets without permission, checking drawers, judging everything like she was the inspector and he was the student failing a test. "Dad, this house is too much work. Too isolated. Too risky. Honestly, I think you should give it to us." Mark lifted his head sharply. "Give what?" Linda sighed like she was tired of explaining. "You can't live here alone. You'll hurt yourself. Fall. Get sick. Freeze in the winter. It doesn't make sense for you to have such a big house. We can take it. Use it as a family vacation place. The kids will love it." Brad nodded. "Yeah. And you can go back to the city. Close to us. Easier for everyone." Mark stared at them. He could almost feel the truth sliding together like puzzle pieces. They weren't here to visit. They weren't here to check on him. They were here to take his new home. His one act of freedom. His one piece of peace. His first gift to himself in decades. And they wanted to take it away. He felt the old Mark inside him, the quiet one, the fearful one, the one who always said yes, rise for a moment. But then something stronger pushed forward. "No," Mark said. The word was simple. Soft. But it struck the room like a thunderstorm. Linda blinked. What did you say? I said no, Mark repeated. This is my home. I bought it. I like it. And I'm staying. Linda crossed her arms. Dad, don't be ridiculous. You can't be stubborn right now. Brad stepped closer, lowering his voice as if talking to a child. Look, old man, you're not thinking clearly. You have health issues. You forget things. You need supervision. I don't need anyone to watch me, Mark replied. Brad snorted. You can barely manage a phone. You think you can manage a house in the mountains? Mark took a breath, steadying himself. I've been taking care of myself for years, he said. Just because you never checked on me doesn't mean I was helpless. Linda's eyes narrowed. Wow. So now you're blaming us. After everything we've done for you. What have you done? Mark asked softly. You forgot me every Christmas. Every year. You left me alone on holidays. You visited only when you needed money. You talked down to me. You treated me like I was a burden. Linda's face turned red. That's not true. It is, Mark said. Even the storm outside seemed to pause. For the first time, Brad didn't have a comeback. Linda looked shocked, like she had never expected Mark to talk back to her. Dad, she said slowly, you're being dramatic. We didn't forget you. We were busy. We had work. We had kids. You know how our schedule is. You had time for other people, Mark replied. Just never for me. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. The kids kept arguing in the background, but their voices sounded far away. You're not taking this house, Mark said. Linda stepped forward, her voice rising. We are your family. You don't get to make big decisions without us. We care about you. No, Mark said, voice firm, you care about control. The words hit Linda harder than he realized. She froze. Brad's jaw tightened. He pointed a finger at Mark. I'm telling you right now, he growled, you're making a big mistake. And you'll regret talking to us like this. Mark felt something powerful rise in his chest. A strength he didn't know he still had. I've regretted staying quiet for years, he answered. But not anymore. Linda's breath shook with anger. Fine, she snapped. If you want to act like this, don't expect us to help you. Don't expect us to come for holidays. Don't expect us to visit. Mark met her eyes. You haven't done those things in years. Linda flinched. Brad pulled her arm. They walked toward the door in silence. But before leaving, Linda turned around with one last cold sentence. You'll be alone. Mark smiled sadly. I already was. They left. The door closed. The storm outside cracked, but inside Mark felt calm. For the first time in his life, he felt free. He walked to the porch, sat down, and listened to the rain hit the mountains. He thought of Andrew, the only one who cared enough to apologize. Maybe, Mark thought, the story wasn't over. Maybe this time, something new was beginning. But deep inside, Mark knew one thing for sure. His family wasn't done with him yet. They never gave up control so easily. And the next time they returned, they would return with a plan. The winter wind howled outside the mountain house. Snow fell heavier now, covering the path to the cabin like a soft white blanket. Mark sat in front of the fireplace, the flames dancing across his calm, determined face. He had spent the past days settling into his new home, arranging furniture, cleaning, and discovering small joys in the quiet. But he knew his family wasn't done. Linda and Brad would come back. They always did when they wanted control. His phone buzzed. A message from Andrew. Grandpa, they're coming back tomorrow. Are you ready? Mark smiled faintly. He was ready in a way he had never been before. The next morning, the sun barely peeked through grey clouds. Mark watched the forest, listening to the quiet crackle of ice and snow under the trees. Around noon, the distant sound of a car broke the silence. He recognized it immediately, their familiar engine. The front door opened, and Linda stepped inside, followed by Brad and the kids. But this time, their faces were harder, colder, sharper. They expected to intimidate him, to force him into giving the house back. They did not know the plan he had prepared. Mark greeted them calmly. "Welcome," he said, voice steady. Linda scowled. "We're here to make sure you're not doing anything stupid. This house, it's too much for you alone." Mark gestured toward the living room. "Sit down. Let me show you something." The family hesitated, but curiosity got the better of them. They followed him to the fireplace. Mark picked up the old journal he had found in the cabin and opened it. "This journal belonged to the previous owner," Mark explained. "A woman named Lily Sanders. She felt the same way I did, ignored, undervalued, alone. This cabin helped her find strength. I think it can teach us something." Linda rolled her eyes. "A journal? Really?" Mark ignored her. He began reading passages aloud, speaking slowly and clearly, letting each word sink in. "I spent years giving everything to people who never cared. This place saved me. You don't need approval to live your life. You don't need permission to be happy." The room was silent. Even the kids stopped squabbling. Brad crossed his arms, listening with an annoyed frown, but his face softened slightly. Mark looked up. "Do you hear that? This house isn't just a building. It's a lesson. A place to be free. And I've learned something important. My happiness isn't your responsibility. And it's certainly not yours to take." Linda opened her mouth, but Mark held up a hand. "I invited you here to see my life," he said firmly. "Not to control it, not to judge it. Just to see it. And maybe, just maybe, to understand why I waited so long to do something for myself." The tension was thick. Linda's hands trembled. Brad's jaw tightened. The kids looked confused. Mark continued. "This house is mine. I bought it with my money. I earned it. And I will live here in peace. You don't get to take that from me. Not anymore." Linda's voice shook. We just wanted to help." "Help me?" Mark repeated. "All these years, you ignored me. You pretended I didn't matter. And now, suddenly, you think taking my house is helping me." She was speechless. No words came. Brad turned to leave but paused, realizing Mark's tone left no room for argument. Mark gestured to the snowy view outside. "Look around. This is my life now. Not yours. I've built it for myself. And it's enough." For the first time, the family felt the weight of their actions. Their years of control, manipulation, and neglect had finally met a wall they could not break. Mark had grown stronger, and the cabin was no longer just a house, it was his fortress of independence. Linda's lips pressed tightly together. She wanted to argue, but there was nothing to say. Brad finally nodded slowly, acknowledging defeat without speaking. The kids were quiet, sensing the shift in power. Mark continued, softly, almost whispering. "I forgive you. But I will not let the past continue. My happiness is mine. And I will protect it." For the first time in years, he felt peace, not the kind that comes from others approving, but the kind that comes from claiming your own life. Over the next weeks, Mark settled fully into the cabin. He spent his days reading, walking in the snow-covered woods, and learning small joys he had long ignored, painting a landscape, cooking his favorite meals, lighting candles, and listening to the quiet crackle of the fire. His family never returned to take control. They called sometimes, awkwardly, but Mark no longer felt the sting of neglect. He responded kindly but kept boundaries firm. He had learned a vital lesson. Happiness could not be given by others. Respect could not be demanded. Freedom was earned through courage. One quiet evening, Mark stood on the porch. Snow fell softly around him. The stars shone faintly in the dark sky. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "This is my life now. My choice. My happiness. And no one can take it from me." He felt the cold wind, the snowflakes, and the silence surrounding the mountain cabin. And he smiled, a real, wide smile that came from the heart. For the first time, he was truly free.